There's a time or reality glitch at a gas station in Georgia. Last Thursday, I was on my usual late-night drive. Part of it included driving along the rural roads that cut through farmland and forest. There was this ambience at night with no one else around, save for the passing car every 5 minutes. That slowed my heart rate. I had been going on these drives for a couple of years, and never has anything looked or sounded out of place. That night was when it changed. I was driving northeast up Georgia 121 when the radio went to static. Not a moment later, I noticed some lights up ahead. As I got closer, I noticed it was a gas station with a convenience store. My stomach was rumbling, so I pulled up into the parking lot. As I stepped out of the car, all I could hear were the sounds of crickets. There were far more out than usual for the area. I walked into the store, then went over to the chips. As I neared them, I noticed the logos were different. The Lay's logo was almost blocky. The white letters were on a red square with lines poking out. I assumed they had changed their logo, then picked up a bag. The price of these chips were much lower than normal too. So low, I realized I could pay with just coins. As I approached the counter, I took notice of the unusually large cash register. The cashier, a wrinkly man with white hair, raised his right brow. "Are you from around here?" "Yes," I said. He didn't say another word as he counted the coins, then put the chips in a bag. I took it, then looked at some of the other brands to see if their logos had changed. I raised my right brow as I noticed they all looked vintage. I took out my phone, then snapped a picture of them. I hopped into my car, then ate a bunch of the chips before going back onto the road. I flipped through the radio stations, only to tune into static, until one of the pop stations came through. When I got home, I posted the picture I took to Instagram, explaining my experience in the caption. I got one comment asking me the location of the gas station. I went onto Google Maps but couldn't find it. I posted my experience to r/glitch in the Matrix. Within an hour, I got a comment asking me what the date on the receipt was. I looked at the receipt. The date would be April 17th, 2025, right? The date was March 15th, 1965. When I added the update, I had some people suggest I slipped into the past or an alternate reality where it was the past. It had to have been simpler than that. That night, I drove along the same route in search for the store. I'm not sure if I somehow missed it, but I couldn't find it whatsoever. I did, however, find a receipt. It was being pushed lightly across the road by the wind. I pulled over to get a look at it, in case it had come from the store. As I leaned towards it, I noticed it was covered in a ton of obscure symbols. On Sunday, I went on another drive. As I drove along Georgia 121, I joked to myself that I'd probably run into the gas station again. Not 3 minutes later, the radio went to static. I saw the lights again. As I approached them, there it was. The gas station. But it had more pumps this time. The convenience store had an updated facade with more posters in its windows. I pulled up into the parking lot, which was paved black instead of gray. I walked into the store, wondering how the place could have been updated so quickly. The aisles were in different places. The cashier was a young blonde woman. The cash register was smaller, with a full LED design. The cashier went into a room in the back, so I took out my phone, then started filming. I got the logos of all the candy and chocolate brands. There was music playing off of a speaker on the ceiling. I got some of it too. I decided to buy some Mars bars so I can get a receipt. I wasn't sure how the cashier would react to the money I had, so I decided to pay in coins. From my observation, the store didn't look too different from a modern one. Only the cash register and brand logos stood out as different. Once I had the bars, I exited the store. There were extra lights in the distance that shouldn't have been there. I hopped into my car, ready for the moment of truth. As I looked down at the bag, the lights from the store went out. I looked up. It was pitch dark, as if the gas station and store were never there. I put the radio on. The familiar top 40 radio DJs were talking. I switched on the interior light, then grabbed the receipt. April 3rd, 2038. My stomach dropped. Looks like I'm coming back the next day. Last night I drove that route again. The radio went to static. I saw the lights up ahead. I approached the store, pulled into the parking lot, then walked into the store. The cashier was to my left. There was no cash register, although there was a floating screen where it should have been. All the aisles were arranged differently. I looked at each of the brand logos. None of them had names I recognized. I took a photo of them, then walked outside. There were even more lights in the distance, a group of skyscrapers spanning from one end of the horizon to the other with seemingly no end. As I looked on at the sight, a shriek sent chills down my spine. It almost sounded human, but it deviated from that. I looked to my right to see the silhouette of an approaching dark figure. My heart sank. The figure stopped for a second, then lunged at me. I sprinted to my car, hopping right in. I slammed the door shut, then ducked. As my heart raced, a thud shook the car, then another. I poked my head up, then started the car. Backing away, the thing ran into view, striking the headlight. It had a dark round shell and a gray body. It took the headlight out before I could get a good look at it. I hit the gas. As I went forward, I pushed the animal out of my way. I went right back onto the road. In my rearview mirror, I saw flashing bright blue and red lights in the distance. I looked back at the road, noticing rows of two-story suburban homes along either side. There was no way I was on the 121st. Seconds later, there was a thud on the window of the passenger side door, along with the cracking of glass. I looked. A mass of an irregular shape was attached to the window. I attempted to shake the thing off to no avail. The pit in my stomach got deeper every few seconds. I continued on down the road, eventually, looking to see the thing was gone. I let out a sigh of relief, then focused back on the road. A moment later, the homes disappeared. Now trees were lined up on either side. The radio DJs were back. I went right back home to attempt to process whatever I had experienced. It seems those time slip stories I've read are real. I'm not sure how many of them are, but for sure at least some of them are. I wonder if there are people who don't make it out of the times or realities they slipped into. People who end up trapped or killed in places like the one I was in. In my driveway, I searched for the bag of chocolate. I checked every seat, every little spot I could have put it, but it was nowhere to be found. I sighed, realizing I must have dropped it at the sight of the animal. The next morning, I looked at my car. The headlight, along with the window of the passenger side door, were both shattered. A gray, gooey substance was smeared all over the glass, clinging to the jagged edges and seeped into the cracks. I scraped the goo into a jar while wondering if I was even in this reality, let alone what year I was in. Earlier today, I spoke to my coworker, Kyle, about my experience. His eyes widened as I went into detail. After I finished, he told me this. "That's so interesting. I need to know where that gas station is, bro." "You might get hurt," I said. He shrugged and sighed. "Just tell me. Life is boring. I want to travel to an alternate reality. I hear about it all the time, and I never get to experience it myself." I gave him the location, thinking maybe my third trip was a fluke. After all, nothing bad happened the first 2 trips. I dreaded the thought of going back onto that route. Despite that, maybe I just need to stay away from there for a bit. Just now, I got a text from my friend, who's also friends with Kyle. Kyle killed himself, and I don't know how to process it. The last thing he told me was that he went to a gas station, saw some creatures. Then he mumbled the rest, aside from the words "started" and "year." I can't believe this happened. I've known him since high school and had so many good moments with him. We were just laughing together at McDonald's yesterday. This is so gut-wrenching. Do you know anything about him going to a gas station? The glitch. Philip K. Dick nailed it on the fucking head. For the better part of a week, my life has been ripped apart again and again. I don't even really know by what. but I recognize the signs when it happens. I've been practicing. I can now spot it in full crowds, even a good 3 miles away. The signs are always there, and you need to be ever vigilant if it ever happens to you, but maybe I should start at the beginning. I say beginning, but I've yet to actually connect all the pieces. If I'm being honest, I haven't really been trying. More on that later. The beginning is as far back as I think is important. A week and a half ago. I had wrapped up my freshman year of college in New York City. I go to a for-profit school in Midtown Manhattan. Small place, but efficient for what I'm pursuing. Due to the nature of the program, classes are finished around mid-April. It took me 3 days to pack up and clean my apartment, and then an extra 2 hours for the residence director to check me out. I took a taxi across the bridge and all the way to Newark. There wasn't a notable amount of traffic. It was a Tuesday afternoon, I think. I had like 6 bags with me and I checked all of them. As much as I hate baggage claim, it was unavoidable. It was just after 3 when I got through security. My flight was at 6:20 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I had checked all my personal electronics save for my phone, a phone without a charger, might I add. I was bored for 3 hours. It was normal. I spent the majority of my time staring blankly at the television rigged on a pillar nearby my gate. Naturally, there was no audio, only the black-barred captions that lagged a good 10 seconds behind what the people were saying. It was CNN, so they didn't have a lot of interesting things to say anyway. Piece after piece went by. Trump and Clinton and the CIA, something about Ted Cruz, Jeb Bush, archival footage of Ronald Reagan, routine CNN stuff. I nodded off for a bit. I hadn't really slept since finals ended, too busy packing. It was a nice nap, barely an hour long. Since I had gotten there earlier than most, I had been mostly sitting amongst people who were boarding the flight before mine. When I woke up, they were gone. A few stragglers remained, people who I would later see on my flight. It was normal. I looked up at the television again. There was barely a cohesive picture. The captions were running fine, but the picture was all sorts of messed up. At the time, I thought the reception must have been terrible because the picture was glitching out something fierce. There were brief moments of clarity, and I kept watching. 3 CNN correspondents sat around a glowing table, frozen with smiles on their faces. The picture was ripped apart into pixels by another camera angle, another smile. A woman moved her head and left pieces of her face scattered in pixels. Lines ran through them, decapitating and bisecting them. Pixel-distorted faces stuck onto other pixel-distorted faces. Faces melted into landscapes. Landscapes melted into faces. An explosion in the desert sprouted from Jeb Bush's head like a pixelized weed. I laughed at this. Ronald Reagan showed up, and his pixel forehead replaced his eyes. He had no eyes. Then he had no mouth. Ronald Reagan's face was pixel flesh. This went on for some time. It was really amusing to me, and I made a game out of it. You ever look up at the sky and try to make shapes from the clouds? Well, I did that, but with the glitches? I found images in the glitches. My favorite was one with Ted Cruz. The area around his beady little eyes glitched and made it look like he was wearing glasses, and his face thinned. He looked exactly like that sketch of the Zodiac Killer. I laughed really hard at this. There were other images like skulls on fighter pilots, but I don't want to linger on that. The glitches. I went home, and it followed me. Please understand that I know very little about my situation. I can only relay what's happened. I can't even begin to speculate. Maybe it's best if I don't. I'm stalling. Let me tell what happened. I didn't notice at first. There were slight discrepancies in my neighborhood. I see them now, but I missed them before. Pictures would twitch. Patches of stucco would flicker for a brief second. My neighbor's tree would move a few inches at a time, then snap back into place. I thought it was the wind for the first 2 days. The reception on my TV was awful, and I played my game for a bit. I didn't notice anything until the weekend. Whole blocks would pixelate and twitch for brief moments and come back different. New paint, new cars, or maybe even new architecture. Once, there was even a new family. No one noticed. No one ever noticed, and I stopped bringing it up. As far as anyone was concerned, the houses had been the exact way they had always been. I thought I was in the Matrix, but Lawrence Fishburne never came. Believe me when I say I tried to get help, to seek some form of medical or psychological attention. I've tried. This leads me into this week, when it all happened. The glitches stopped manifesting the way they had been. They hadn't stopped, they've never stopped. They just changed. Or maybe adapted is a more appropriate term. I don't know. Anyway, I would get in my car and drive to the hospital. I would be on the road, sometimes at a traffic light, and then be lying in my bed. The first time it happened, I choked up. When my throat allowed it, I started screaming. I went into a full panic attack. After I calmed down, I'd get back in my car and try again. Every time I ended up back in my bed. I made it closer to the hospital, sometimes more than others. There were times that I barely even touched the steering wheel before it glitched. This happened hundreds of times. When I stopped feeling ill, I started experimenting with it. I stopped wanting to go to the hospital, so I tried to go to the grocery store instead. I sat in my car for 10 minutes. Nothing happened. I drove to the store. Nothing happened. I parked my car, went inside, and bought a party-size bag of potato chips and 3 packs of cigarettes. Nothing happened. I called 911 once. I fabricated some emergency and had them dispatched to my house. The ambulance parked outside as I stared at it from the front door. A moment later, the door was closed and the ambulance had never come. I never called them. It wasn't letting me leave the house on the grounds that directly involved its nature. I could go about my day, but I chose not to. Instead, I tested it. I wish I hadn't. I made it angry, I think. I had gone for a walk one afternoon. There's a cul-de-sac near my house where the neighbors throw a lot of block parties, with bonfires and everything. I've gone to a few. They were normal. The established patriarch of our neighborhood is this guy named Bill Fredericks. He's nice. He and his wife, Sharon, have lived on the left hemisphere of the cul-de-sac, with a little waist-high white fence outside. They're generally responsible for organizing all the local events. Bill's a stout man, in his early 50s, with some sort of managerial job. He and Sharon were watering their plants outside, and a few of the neighbors had gathered out front to chat. I joined them. I shouldn't have. "Hey, bud, how was school?" Bill has a habit of calling the people he likes, bud. He does this with people he dislikes too. There's a tonal difference. I told him about school. He pretended to understand my career. I like Bill. "That's real great. We're glad to have you back." Sharon chirped something inquisitive about my parents. They were out of town. I forgot to mention my parents. I've forgotten to mention a lot. One of the neighbors mumbled something about liberals. I'm a liberal, I think. We all ignored them. I'm not sure why, but I told Bill that I hadn't been feeling well, that things had been weird. He tilted his head and asked me what I meant. "A lovely day for gardening," a voice crackled behind me. It was like the static you hear from a child's walkie-talkie, with tonal and pitch variations. When I turned around, I saw another neighbor, Karen Phillips, beaming from ear to ear. She had a funny expression. The air tasted like copper. "Take a stroll through your local food market, John dear," the static voice continued. I've put dash to mark where the tone changed. It was like a tuning radio. Her voice was like a tuning, malfunctioning radio with terrible reception. There was more distortion. The air flicked with pixels. I noticed what was so funny about her expression now. It was her eyebrow, the right one. It was angled weird, like she was squinting, but she wasn't. It's sliding down her face like melting wax. Her mouth dropped open, and white noise filled the pixel air. Her voice shrieked far off and through a million radios. "I'm going to fucking die." I blinked. And I was across the street. My eyes hurt and my ears were ringing. It took me a moment to realize I was staring directly into a collection of blue and red emergency lights. I rubbed the lights away. Bill's picket fence was gone. There was scorched earth in his yard, and the front of his house had been ripped away. The heat was still present. The air didn't taste like copper anymore. where the grass hadn't been burned, and between chunks of debris there were flecks of red. Charred and blown apart bodies. Bill was on a stretcher, being loaded into an ambulance. He was screaming, his legs were gone. There was a nearby police officer, and I asked him what happened. I think I was still in shock. Gas line exploded. 3 of my neighbors and Sharon were killed in the accident. Bill lost his legs. I knew it wasn't an accident, though. The glitch used those people as an example. I screamed, and I screamed. The air tasted like copper, and I stopped screaming. I couldn't scream. I was panting instead, because I was running down the street. A different street, the next town over. I was in a crowd of people who were all running away from something that none of us dared look back at. I blinked, and I was back in front of Bill's house. The wreckage was still there. An hour had passed. Various incidents have happened since. Too many. I know it's only been a week, but the glitch messes with my time. Everything is blending together, and I'm forgetting my own chronology. I was making a sandwich. Then I was stabbing my neighbor's dog. Then I ate the sandwich. The dog barked at some squirrel outside. I spent one night begging my friend for help. Then I never sent the messages. Then I never typed them. Then my friend hanged herself. Then she sent me a picture of her dog. I like dogs. I left my town and kept driving. I made it 5 miles. Then I was at home, staring into my oven. Then I was running again. The sky was a pale orange, and people were screaming. They were running. Then I was crawling. A pair of young children dressed in red danced in the yard in front of me. They were eating their parents, singing hymns. Then I was making a sandwich. People forget the little things they do at any given time. I've started remembering them all, the normal consistencies. My finger taps out some tune on my pants. I like that tune. I think it has something to do about dogs. I like dogs. I've come to realize that it is always watching me in one way or another. People are always staring at me, always otherwise unremarkable people in crowds or on park benches staring at me. They aren't people, though. The glitch doesn't use people. They're like bad Xerox copies. Parts of them are wrong. It doesn't seem to get the faces right, but I've noticed extra fingers and sometimes crooked noses. They aren't people. They aren't anything. The faceless Gipper watched me while I slept last night. There is no sentience behind those eyes. Nothing. They're cameras. I'm a hostage to time, and people are dead because of me. That's something I noticed early on. The people that the glitch kills stay dead, no matter what else has changed. It's never me, though. I'm never subject to physical harm. Only others. There's more. I've written more. Then I haven't written more. Then I've stopped caring. Then I've tried again. I keep trying. I don't know why. I want normality. I keep writing for normality. But there's no point. But I post here. I keep posting here. The glitch deletes it every time. The glitch deletes everything I've written. I've written this so many times. I'm tired. I've forgotten a lot. This is my 57th time posting this here. It wasn't an ordinary glitch in Matrix. I'd always thought that life functioned like a system of complex computer programs. For example, when you touch a stove, you get burnt. If you spend too much time in cold temperature, you get hypothermia. If you apply too much strain to a limb, it breaks. Every consequence is resultant from a previous action. A simple conditional statement, if you will. Now, I can't confirm the existence or lack thereof in regards to a creator. A god, if you will. I obviously don't have that authority. But if one were to exist, it would make sense that this is just the way that we were programmed. How the reality that we see in front of us was meant to function. Just a system of codes. But just like man-made programs, nothing's perfect. And with such a large and complicated one like life itself, even a god would have to make mistakes. Right? I can pinpoint the exact moment where it all started happening. At that moment, I wasn't at a great spot in my life. Now, I wasn't depressed or anything, just kind of disassociated with everything around me. My life had stagnated, to say the least. I had a feeling that my best years were behind me, and being a mere 32 years of age, that wasn't a good feeling. I'd gotten fired from my last job when I was 29. Luckily, though, I'd gotten a new one nearly right after. Now, it wasn't one I liked, but I suppose beggars can't be choosers. However, my office was only around a 10-minute walk from my studio apartment, so that was good. Anyhow, it was a late-night work session. Most everybody else had gone home, but I stayed due to the amount of work that I'd procrastinated on from weeks prior. I wanted to get a good chunk of it done. At one point, I got up in order to pour myself some coffee. As I walked into the kitchen, I noticed a door located in one of the corners. The thing is, I didn't think that I'd ever seen it before, but I also rarely went into the kitchen. I find small talk with my particular coworkers to be incredibly excruciating. I just assumed that I didn't pay enough attention to notice it. It was a rather large area after all. Out of sheer curiosity, I decided to see where it led. I was honestly expecting it to be a pantry of sorts. However, I was surprised as hell when I opened it up. It was an empty, medium-sized room with smooth gray walls and floors. I walked around, exploring the place for a while before quickly realizing that there was literally nothing in there. It was pretty damn weird, in all honesty. I mean, what the hell was this place, and what purpose did it have? As I was about to turn and head out, I noticed what appeared to be small objects in one of the corners of the room. Now, I could have guaranteed that they weren't there before. In fact, I nearly jumped out of my skin when I saw it. I quickly walked over and examined them, discovering that they appeared to be a couple of rifle rounds. I just threw them back down and left that room. I was beginning to feel uneasy as hell. I ran back into the office and prepared to head home. I just assumed that the work had been getting to my head. To make sure, I looked around in order to see if anybody else was still there. The janitor was, so I made the assumption that he was the one that had placed the bullets there. But in retrospect, that made absolutely no sense. The sky was already dark as I started to make my way back home. It was around 8 p.m. when I'd left. Feeling somewhat hungry, I decided to stop by at a pizza place on the way. Now, I'd been to the place numerous times, so I'd pretty much memorized the opening and closing times for every single day of the week. That's why I found it so shocking that the place was closed. It was always open until 9 p.m. on weekdays. Whatever, I thought. This wasn't even the strangest thing that had happened to me that day. The place must have just abruptly changed their hours. I looked over at the opening-closing times displayed out on the windows to confirm it. However, this part made less sense. 6 out of the 7 days maintained the same schedule. It was only today, Tuesday, that had changed so that it closed 1 hour earlier. Although this was somewhat disconcerting, it wasn't beyond explanation. I just went home and made something else to eat instead. These kinds of small, unexplainable incidents started happening to me more and more often throughout the next few months. Things would be misplaced from where I had last left them. People I didn't know seemed to recognize me, while people I'd known for years seemed to have no clue who I was, and I'd keep finding bullets in the most random of places. One of the strangest incidents was when I finally decided to go and see a psychologist. After telling him everything that had been happening, he just stared at me for the longest time before saying, "This isn't where you really are. This is just temporary, but it's better that you don't wake up right now," before literally leaving me by myself in his office. The thing is, while these events were incredibly disturbing, they were still far and few in between. In other words, they were still essentially manageable. That all changed on a Saturday a few weeks later. The previous night, I'd been out drinking with a few friends. I guess I went a little too hard because I barely remembered anything when I woke up. The thing that I deemed rather peculiar was that I didn't even feel the signs of a hangover creeping up on me. But just like the pizza place, I didn't bother thinking too much of it. These were small details after all. I turned on my laptop and started going through my emails. Having an inbox filled with random bullshit always bothered me. About a few minutes into that, I got a text from my buddy Ansel, who I had gone out with last night. Dude, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I actually think Matt might have gotten laid last night. Shit was nuts. You should have came, man. I must have stared at that text for 10 minutes. You see, there were two things wrong with what Ansel had just told me. One, I vividly remembered going out with them on Friday. Now, I don't remember most of the actual night, but I sure as hell remember getting off work and then entering our first bar. Second of all, who the hell was Matt supposed to be? I don't know anybody named Matt. This was it. I've gone crazy, I thought to myself. But then I started to calm down. This kind of stuff happened to me sometimes. They were just momentary blips in the matrix. This couldn't have been that big of a deal. With this rationalization in my head, I just continued on with the day. I didn't have anything planned, so I decided to stay in and binge YouTube. And that's exactly what I did. I remember it starting out normal at first. I watched the channels that I usually did. At one point, I found myself watching a documentary about human trafficking. It was so weird, I couldn't for the life of me remember how I had gotten there. As I listened to the narrator talk, I began looking at the recommended related videos. One caught my eye. The thumbnail was that of a man in military gear, sitting on top of a Humvee in a desert. However, the title is what drew me into it. Where do you think you are right now? Because it's not where you're supposed to be. I remember just sitting there, trying to understand what that title was getting at. This was strange, wasn't it? I decided to click on it. Now, the video itself was extremely shaky and incomprehensible. It looked erratic in a sense. I could tell that it was filmed inside, but I'm not really sure in what kind of place. I could make out what appeared to be rotting wooden walls, but that was about it. However, the audio was the really messed up part. There was screaming, desperate, hoarse, painful ones, about 3 sets in total, and they wouldn't stop. That's when I noticed the duration of the video, 26,288 hours and 22 minutes. Now, I was pretty sure that wasn't possible because of YouTube's upload duration limitations. I closed the video and then the laptop. That was enough internet for today. I yawned and stretched my arms out. I felt so tired for some reason. That's when I checked the time. It was 11 p.m. I got out of my chair and opened my blinds. It was indeed dark outside. What the hell? I thought. I knew for sure that I had opened my laptop at around 1 p.m. There was no way in hell that it'd been 10 hours. At that moment, I knew that something must have been very wrong here. But what? What the hell could have been happening to me? I checked my phone. 78 missed calls and texts. I looked through them. Most of them were from my mother. Some were from my friends. A few texts were even from Brandy, my ex-girlfriend around 3 years. I really miss you, is what they say. Why the hell would she say that now? I tossed my phone and started pacing around my apartment. My head started pounding. But it wasn't just a headache. My left arm and ribs were also burning with this intense pain that I'd never felt before. I went to the bathroom, looking for something that could have helped. Eventually, I found some morphine. I felt sheer bliss as I injected it into my bloodstream. But then another troubling thought made its way into my head. Why the hell did I have morphine? I couldn't recall a situation that could have led to me having it in my possession. I walked out of the bathroom and started pacing again. This was just a nightmare, I tried telling myself. But why was the pain so vivid? I decided that I really needed to get some rest. I started heading towards my bed when I was jolted by the sounds of explosions coming from inside my bedroom. I flipped shit and ran the hell out of my apartment. I wandered around the streets for a while, not knowing what to do, not knowing where to go, and not even beginning to understand what in the actual hell was going on. Eventually, I came across what appeared to be a group of 4 men huddled together at a crosswalk. They all had their backs turned to me, so I couldn't make out any facial features, but I could also tell that they weren't moving at all. I don't know how to explain it, but the air started to feel hostile around me. It felt like I was heading right into danger. I started backing away, but not before the men turned around to look at me. But ironically enough, they had no faces to look at me with, just smooth, empty skin where an expression should have been. In an instant, they began charging at me. I started running. As I tried to evade what was surely a horrific fate behind me, I began to notice that my surroundings had drastically changed. I wasn't in the city that I had been living in the past 3 years anymore. Instead, I was somewhere both familiar and not at the same time, like I'd been to the place before but didn't quite remember where it was. It got to the point where I just couldn't keep running. I remember collapsing onto the pavement and turning back in horror to see the group of faceless entities still thundering their way towards me. I just sat there, waiting for whatever twisted outcome to finally come and claim me. I didn't want to deal with this shit anymore. However, as the men got to within about 30 meters away from me, they just stopped. A few seconds passed before one of their throats seemed to get slit open by an invisible force. The others looked around frantically before two of them literally seemed to blow up. The last one just started sprinting away. In absolute shock at what I had just seen, I pulled myself back up and started walking around again. As I did, my mind seemed to be getting clearer. This new city I was in, I started to recognize it more. But what was I doing there? Eventually my vision started to fade, but in the conventional sense. It was like the area around me was getting too bright. It got to the point where I could barely see anything. I passed out a few seconds later. I awoke in a rundown cabin. I heard a bunch of commotion as figures swarmed around me, talking loudly to each other. I looked over to see a man in military gear kneeling beside me, administering a needle into my arm. We made eye contact. Wait, I recognized him. "What's up, Dempsey? You're safe now. We finally found you." He smiled at me. It was Matthew. I did know a Matt. I started looking around the room to find it filled with other military guys. There were also 2 skinny, broken-looking men also being tended to. In addition to that, there were also 3 body bags on the floor. I was still somewhat disoriented, so I passed out again. I woke back up again in a hospital room. A man in a suit was sitting by the foot of my bed, looking at his phone. He smiled when he saw that I was up. "Mr. Dempsey, how are you feeling?" He went on to explain how I was actually a Navy SEAL. I had been sent on a mission to capture a notorious human trafficker who had been tracked down to an abandoned town in Belarus. However, things went south and nearly everybody on my team had died, leaving only 3 of us, including me, to be captured and used as leverage towards the US government. We were held hostage there for 3 years, constantly being tortured during that time. It was only a few days ago before they finally found us, also managing to kill the trafficker. After dropping that bomb on me, the man left me alone to contemplate. It all started to come back to me. The mission, the ambush. However, I didn't remember the torture. That was when my memory became foggy and was replaced by the life I thought I had been living just a few days prior. The evidence of my physical deterioration was evident. I was bone skinny, had cuts all over my body, and was missing my left ring finger. But I don't remember experiencing any of it. I told all of this to my nurse, but she probably thought I was insane. Who knows? Maybe I am. However, I asked for a laptop so that I could type all of this down. My request was granted. The first thing that I did was search up major events that had happened during the 3 years that I was out of commission. It all lined up. The Cubs won in 2016. Trump took office in 2017. Carrie Fisher died. I knew it all. I even searched up Brandy's Facebook profile. She had the same picture that she'd updated only a few months ago. There was no way that the last few years of my life had all been imagined. Now I can't begin to speculate what happened. Was it a glitch or corruption in the Matrix? I couldn't say. Was it a mistake by God? possibly, but maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was deliberate. Maybe this God knew exactly what it was doing. Glitches are not real. I am currently in upstate New York, in a facility which I can assume is for severely delusional individuals. I am not that. I am not a crazy. I am only able to access a computer for 15 minutes a day, so I will try and give you an idea of how this nightmare began and why you should never, never take a glitch in the matrix you experience seriously. I know what you're all thinking, but let me tell you my story and just try and keep an open mind. I have considered myself a fairly active person since I started participating in sports at a young age. As I grew older and my competitive youthfulness began to fade, I would find myself in the gym more often than I would find myself at a rec softball game or a match of tennis. Competition requires direct contact and conversation with others, which is something that I had success with when I was younger, but has faded with maturity. My normal gym routine is to go in and do 45 minutes working whatever muscle group I am focusing on that particular day, followed by about a 1.5 mile run a day. I would try and do this 5 times a week. I have been a member of my local, It's Fun to Stay at the, for approximately 6 years. I know everyone there by name, and despite little communication, I receive warm smiles and pleasant indifference from most staff. When I walked into my gym on May 4th, something just felt off. Well, clearly something was off. I have no idea how to physically describe the energy in the room, but it felt as if I had just shown up to a funeral in all white boasting champagne and balloons. All eyes were on me. I cannot emphasize enough that when I say all eyes, I mean all eyes. The entrance of the gym opens up to a lobby with a small indoor play area for children. Small slides and tiny human-sized hamster tubes for all sorts of scrambling and crawling lined the walls and protruded approximately 10 feet into the lobby. As I am walking in, I hear every conversation stop. A small 4-year-old girl no more than 15 feet away immediately stops crying and removes her hand from her dismembered leg. Stares. I hit a hard 360, assuming there was some kind of event happening behind me which had captured the attention of literally every person in the room. In the half a second it took me to turn back to the lobby, everyone had returned entirely to what they were doing prior to my entrance. The little girl had resumed crying, and it sounded as if she had never stopped. Okay. At this point, I know something is off, but I chalked it up to my narcissistic personality. I loved all eyes on me, and I assumed everyone was just checking me out as I sauntered in. Sure. Fine. I start to walk toward the counter where Jim, the front desk assistant, would normally take a scanner to my keychain to ensure I wasn't some sort of identical imposter. Today, he was the imposter. At a very minimum, for the past 6 years, Jim would look up at me, smile, and offer, "Have a good workout," before scanning my card. Often we would talk about how great that particular day was, or perhaps even a quick sharing of weekend plans if I wasn't in a rush to get home. Jim and I were not strangers. Jim holds out his hand with the scanner ready, never breaking eye contact with the computer screen in front of him. I obligingly hold up my card, but Jim makes no attempt to try and scan it. He appears motionless, but I don't care, nor do I dare consider that there's anything extraordinary going on. Would you? This is a youth men's club after all. They've been around since the beginning of America or something. It's a family place. I reach out and place my card under the scanner and head upstairs to the weights because that's why I'm here. No more eyes on me. Not that I care. The weight room was composed of a line of about 30 treadmills, followed by a line of about 20 ellipticals, all on the right side of the room. On the left side, the benches, dumbbells, and resistance machines were found. In the back of the room was open space for calisthenic auxiliary exercises on mats, push-ups, sit-ups, leg lifts, etc. The gym was empty by standard of a typical weekday at 5 p.m. rush hour for the gym. Maybe 8 other people inside the weight room excluding myself. I found myself excited at this though. I looked around with eager eyes at the openness of the machines, knowing that I could go at whatever pace I wanted and use whatever machine I pleased. I didn't think about spending 3 minutes looking for a parking spot before I came in because the lot was so crowded. Excited me goes over to the seated overhead press, essentially just a seat with a metal bar in front of it, the bar being approximately 4 inches in front of my face and 2 inches below my chin. You try and push the bar above your head while keeping you back pressed against the seat. It's a nice shoulder workout, which was what I was focused on that day. First set went great. Then it happened. I load up my second set, feeling the rhythm of the electronic mix I was listening to. I sit down and start to hype myself up, feeling the beat start to build up, slowly incorporating a collection of hi-hats and bass lines and bass drums and kicks and snares and synths, with all of them mixing and merging, getting faster and faster and more prevalent, until with perfect timing, it pauses in a glorious moment of perfect silence. I lock my hands onto the metal bar and push up as the instrumentation returns in a cataclysmic explosion of noises only a computer could love. I work through my first rep, and as I'm coming down the bar slips from my hands. Now I am not a huge person, but I had been working out for 6 years now, so this was a considerable amount of weight that was now mid-air, plummeting directly for my groin and legs. I watch as the bar travels in slow motion toward my unprotected body, thinking to myself that this was going to be a disaster. Right as it makes contact, I feel an overwhelming shot of pain in my right leg, which I could easily identify as the snapping of my femur, probably the most painful possible break. The sound was wretched. Never had I heard a snap so soulful, so full-bodied and dense, so deep and terrifying. I opened my mouth and went to let out a huge scream, but instead was met with what felt like an absence of vocal cords. Nothing but that raspy, sandpaper feeling in my throat that accompanies an allergic reaction to food or drinking something that is too hot, too quickly. The bar fell to my lap quickly, but not as quickly as the snap back to me holding the bar above my head. I look up and see my own hands holding the same bar, with the same weight that I had initially loaded, slowly moving downward toward the rack, and then finally placing it on the protruding metal shelves that hold the bar when it's not in use. Only I wasn't present for that movement. As soon as I felt the weight of the bar go limp, I sprang out of my seat. I was in control now. I looked around to see if anyone happened to be looking in my direction. Even if the other gym-goers were wearing headphones, I knew they would have heard that snap. Almost all of the other people present that day happened to be on treadmills which face windows looking out toward the parking lot, away from the free weights and machines behind their backs. The only other person utilizing machines was a girl on a leg press, which also happened to be facing the other direction. Great. I stopped and thought. The sound, the pain, watching the bar plummet at me. I knew it to be real and I knew it happened. I watched it happen. I felt my right leg snap and I felt the strain in my vocal cords as they attempted to produce an audible sound. I heard that disgusting snap. Jesus. At this point, people in the gym started to give me glances. I had sprang from my seat and made some noise while looking around, but the majority of the people in the gym were wearing headphones, so it was a bit odd, but I just assumed they had heard me get up. I thought about how I could confirm to myself that this actually happened. I needed to see it. Oh shit. There are cameras in the gym to ensure people are cleaning up their messes. That could show me dropping this bar on myself maybe. And then I could confirm that this had actually happened and it wasn't some extremely vivid hallucination. I head downstairs with a few pairs of eyes watching me and march to the front desk. Hey Jim, any chance I could see the security feed of the weight room from about 5 minutes ago? Why? Jim was a friendly face in the gym, offering warm reception to just about any request you would make of him. This curt response was startling, and despite my attempt at making eye contact, Jim never wavered from the screen. He was glued. I could have sworn that I dropped the bar on myself, breaking my leg, and I want to see if it shows that on the feed, I replied hesitantly. That's impossible. You walked down here, didn't you? As Jim offered this retort, I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and a deep, cool breeze overcame the room. He looked up at me and offered an inviting, soft smile, which I deemed to be genuine. The smile was genuine at least, but his eyes, it wasn't that there was something necessarily wrong with them, but this eerie feeling that Jim was looking through me enveloped my psyche, and for a moment I swear I could hear Jim pleading for me to help him, all while holding that delicate, tempting smile. "I suppose you're right," I conceded with dismay. Whatever was going on had got the best of me at this point, and I was just about ready to bolt for the door when Jim spoke once more. "You walk down here," he said quite matter-of-factly. I looked once more at him and noticed that his smile had began to contort itself on his face. I watched with my own eyes as the sides of his mouth crept upward, slowly emitting blood, making him look like the Joker. Only it wasn't one singular laceration. Instead, they grew outward like arteries on a river, mirroring the veins one would expect in a normal human face. Pin-sized orifices on his nose expanded, swallowing the flesh in their place, and began to ooze brown, chalky liquid, which flowed down into a jagged, knife-like point that now occupied his nose. As I looked on as his eyes began to melt back into his head, pulsating as the life left them, revealing void eye sockets, terrorizing, bottomless, black holes that were impossible to avert my own eyes from, they pulled me in with soft whispers of solitude. "Have a good day," he exclaimed, "and see you soon." And just as quickly as the bar had dropped on my lap, Jim returned to his enthusiastic, welcoming state. I rubbed my eyes and looked at him once more as I tried to flush the imprint of that demonic figure out of my head. "Thanks, you too." As I turned toward the front door, I felt the pressure of everyone's eyes on me again. I felt that same indescribable physical aura looming in the air, slowly encapsulating my consciousness, lugging me into the depths of its own determined path. It was something. I flexed every muscle in my body as I tried to take one more step towards the door, but I collapsed and blacked out. When I woke up, I knew I was done for. Something was covering my head so I couldn't make out what was around me, and handcuffs kept my hands together behind my back so I couldn't reach up to remove it. I tried to tilt my head back and forth to get a view of the floor, but apparently this bag was covering my whole head. Almost as soon as I started moving, I felt a coarse hand grab me by the elbow and start to lead me downstairs slowly, making sure I had my footing right before proceeding. The hand pushed me into a room where I blacked out again. When I woke for the second time, I was surrounded by clangs and clings of metal hitting metal, and unfortunately, now I could see. I was in a room approximately 6 by 6, leather straps holding my wrists and ankles in place. Above me was a single source of light, which appeared to be natural, but at the same time I felt as though I was deep underground. In front of me was a table with a manila envelope on it, labeled classified. And directly across from me sat a man, I'm assuming, in an all-black one-piece bodysuit, covering his face and every part of his body. I felt safe assuming he was a man because he spoke with a booming voice promptly after I regained consciousness. "You must be extremely confused and concerned. Relax, everything is going to be just fine. My name is Dao, and I am here to help you." I quickly replied, "If you're supposed to help me, why am I restrained?" Dao paused, but clearly he had heard this question before. "This is going to be extremely difficult, but you had your second manic episode last week when you were at the gym. Here's the police report detailing what happened." He opened the envelope and pushed a single piece of paper toward me. It read, "The perpetrator entered the scene at 5 p.m. and began vigorously ogling everyone, crying hysterically that they were going to get him. He ran upstairs into the weight room before maintenance could tackle him and threw a bar on a man attempting to utilize the seated overhead press, breaking his right femur. He ran back downstairs and attempted to try and take the front desk assistant's computer before he fell to the ground in cardiac arrest. Seeing as he carries a severe dissociative personality, no charges are being pressed at the time. We wish him the best with a speedy recovery and hope he can live more than 4 years without an episode this time around. Dow noticed me look up, so he was safe, in assuming that I had finished reading what I was certain to be a cover-up. I know what I saw. I know it. I know you won't believe me, but you had a very similar instance about 4 years ago in the same place. You tried to attack and kill a small girl, but we managed to get you off her after you had broken her leg. Oh, how convenient that I had seen a girl with a broken leg. That's really supporting the story here, boys, I thought to myself. Dew stopped. He knew that he wasn't going to fool me. I knew too much. Your last treatment was approximately 3 months long, and we thought we had you completely medicated and functional. This time around will probably be similar. As he said that, I watched his mouth start to creep into that wretched V shape. I gazed on as brown pus flushed itself from orifices on his nose and finally looked back into those deep, ominous sockets that I longed to accompany. I tried to let out a scream, but my vocal cords felt as if they were gone. You walked down here, didn't you? Dew said with a smile.